Okay. So I think everyone knows at this point we had a presidential election this week, right? So my daughter, I have a 9-year-old, absolutely fascinated with the process. She can explain the Electoral College, which is actually a very hard thing to do. She can come up and explain the Electoral College, and she really enjoyed it. She wasn't so she was a little surprised by the results, and she had to get a grip on Wednesday, and she came down, and right before she jumped on the bus today, she goes, "Dad, I want to be the first female president." I'm like, all right, I love it. So I would, you haven't met her, I'm sure, but I would highly encourage you to get on board now. She's a force of nature, so she's, and I think it's nice that a young woman, a young girl knows that she can be president one day. So I think that's great. So this is quite interesting. I think two other things I want to bring up before we launch into the panel. I think if it hasn't been done already, I'd love to do it. I'd like to recognize David Green for putting this event together and doing such a great job. The idea for the event came up between a conversation with Phil Kuchma and Kim Markway and David recently, and I use sports analogies quite a bit. David took the football and ran with it and did such a great job in a relatively short amount of time. So thank you, David, and hopefully we can do many more of these in the future. And then also, this is the weekend of the Bridgeport Art Trail, the 8th annual Art Trail. And I saw Suzanne before. I'm not sure she's in the audience now, but I'd like to recognize Suzanne Kachmar for doing such a great job in organizing the Art Trail. It has grown. It's certainly heavily involved in downtown, but it really highlights the many assets Bridgeport has. And it's great to see we're layering on events like this onto the Art Trail, and it's growing, and it's becoming a brand event for Bridgeport. So Suzanne, if you're here, thank you. If not, thank you. And I think this is a well-timed panel. We're going to talk about shared services for the nonprofit sectors, for artists, for cultural leaders. And you could tell by at the end of Amanda's presentation, there were questions about shared space, and how can we achieve an efficiency of services. And I'm particularly interested, and I jumped on being the moderator of this when David brought it up, because I run a small organization. I wear several hats, and I like the idea of combining with partners on back office operations. And I think you really enjoy this. So I'm going to turn it over to our panelists. We have a great variety of folks here with Phil and Dawn and Richard and Jim. They have background in both nonprofit and for-profit services, and they've already had quite a few conversations about this concept. So Richard, you and I were speaking yesterday, and I'm going to wonder if you could, I'm actually going to ask everyone, and Richard, I'm asking you to start, to introduce yourselves and talk about your organization very briefly, and one major project that you're taking on with your initiative.
Sure. You caught me by surprise on the order.
There you go.
And maybe David as well. So my name is Richard Wenning. Great to be with you all today. And David, are we going to be showing a video as well? I was going to let you watch this brief video, and then I'll give you 2 minutes after it. How's that? Spread Music Now funds music education. We make it possible for children to have access to high-quality arts and music education in their schools and after school as well.
People should support Spread Music Now because their money is having such a greater impact that goes beyond just music. The students come every Monday and Wednesday, and the instruments that they are able to play with us are violin and viola from the Western orchestral setting, as well as native instruments, charango and guitar. We also have a bilingual choir, and all of our students participate in our homework and tutoring tables.
Our partnership with Spread Music Now has really enabled us for the first time to cast a statewide gaze at our work. We've gone into Hartford, we've gone into Bridgeport, we're now going into New Haven, and we're looking at going even beyond and into the top 10 largest highest need cities in the state, and that's really thanks in large part to our partnership with Spread Music Now.
We look at Spread Music Now as being a vehicle to build the capacity of nonprofits and public school systems to do a stronger job in meeting the needs of kids.
Last year, Spread Music Now donated $30,000 to our organization, and because of their generosity, we were able to infiltrate the whole town with the music, and we were really, really excited about it.
Some of the organizations we work with start with kids at a very young age, but then stick with them all the way through their schooling, and then get them ready for graduation. That's the kind of experience we're very interested in.
The youth development that comes from music education is multifaceted. Yes, it's skills-based. You learn to play this or that, etc. Yes, you learn discipline, but you learn a lot of other things that contribute to your overall development as a human being. The ability to get along with others, the ability to work towards common goals.
The program is 100% scholarship, and it's thanks to organizations like Spread Music Now that we are able to subsidize the music educational experience for all of our children.
No donation's too small. In fact, what we're so interested in is the idea of momentum against this cause. The idea is that we can all be citizen philanthropists. We can all participate as individuals and families to make sure that all of our children have brighter futures. Spread Music Now.
Spread Music Now.
Spread Music Now.
Spread Music Now.
Thank you. I figured a little video would give you a taste of what we're up to. I direct a family foundation called the Bee Foundation here in Connecticut, and when we looked to see how we can make a contribution in the arts, we took a look at the marketplace and saw some challenges with money, marketing, and capacity. And we talked to our friends at Fairfield County's Community Foundation, who are just terrific partners of ours, and we decided to launch Spread Music Now. Both as a fund. It's a donor-advised fund at Fairfield County's Community Foundation that we invest in through Bee Foundation, but also as a digital marketing brand and an umbrella to bring awareness and marketing acumen to the nonprofits that we work with. So we raise money on behalf of multiple organizations, and we've invested about $550,000 over the last 2 years from Bee Foundation. We've raised about $100,000 so far. And we're now up to, in those 2 years, 250,000 followers on Facebook globally, and we have a very aggressive digital marketing strategy to engage the public to create will in investing in music and art education for our youth. But the idea is to do something larger than ourselves, and so we're very interested in working with organizations that are both delivering terrific services to their constituents, but are also interested in working together. So ergo, a common marketing effort where most of what we do is talk about the great work of others, and then raising money, which we're generally able to match and direct. So almost all of that funding is focused here in Connecticut. We do a little work in New Orleans through raised money, but all of the money from our corpus investment goes right back here into Connecticut, particularly Fairfield County, as well as Hartford. So I'll stop there. I think that's about 5 minutes, and we'll talk about our interest in shared services as we go forward. So thank you.
Thank you. Next, Jim Kern from Camaraderie in Stanford. Jim, let's share a little more about what you're doing with Camaraderie.
So Camaraderie was formed as a combination really of two words, camaraderie and community. And ironically, one of the catalysts for this whole thing was an exploration into the music industry. And we saw music stores dying by the thousands throughout the U.S., and I think a guy at Connecticut Music who characterized it best most of all was, we used to be a gathering point for musicians to come in and sort of learn a new lick together or play together or have some fun together. And now all we get are people who say, I saw this on the internet, can you sell it to me for half this price? And so that evolved into developing a shared workplace that we operate that allows us to have built the infrastructure so that each new office member and company that domiciles in our facility doesn't have to build out everything and doesn't have to sign a 10-year lease. So the premise behind it was We want to act as a place for people to come and convene and innovate and be part of a community and be able to work together without bearing the cost of building an entire new building.
Excellent. Thanks, Jim. I appreciate it. Next is Dawn Reshan-Doty from, we've got Benet Enterprises, and Dawn, you and I have something in common. We're both Hatters from Danbury.
Okay,
Right?
great.
So we have a great cross-section of Fairfield County here. You know, we've got Reading, Stanford, Danbury, Bridgeport. So Dawn, tell us a little more about Benet.
This is our 30th year in business, and we were also lucky enough to be the Connecticut Minority Business of the Year. We act as external CFOs to other companies, handle all of their back office functions as well as a very in-depth financial reporting. Really, we help businesses with all the things they don't know. And that's key, whether it's in the for-profit sphere or in the for-profit world. We help educate business owners, entrepreneurs, and give them the back office functions that they need to succeed. So we have 2 locations actually, one in Danbury, and we're lucky enough to have one in Portland, Maine. And so through that, we've been able to experience 2 different types of spaces. So Danbury Hatters, traditional manufacturing town. We are in a brick and mortar location on Main Street, and we're part of that merchant downtown community. In Portland, our offices are in a co-working space. And I had the pleasure the last 2 years to transition from literally having a desk to go to a small cubicle, to now having an office as we're growing in Portland. Very different type of town, very different type of space, and different community. And so we've been able to take the best from both places and try and bring it to the other area that we're in. And we expect to go another 30 years after this. So thank you.
Keep it up. We want that. Absolutely. And Phil Kuchma, I think everyone knew as Phil from moderating an earlier panel, but Phil, do you want to talk a little more about the Bijou and some of the black box theaters and other projects you're working on?
Thanks, Mike. I'm the fortunate byproduct of parents who both grew up in New York City. My dad was a professional singer and musician before he went into the service during the Second World War, and my mom, who grew up in what is now called the East Village, but had to grow up knowing how to make things work with very little money. Her dad passed away when she was only 8 years old, and for both those reasons, I guess part of my brain is affected by each of them. So I feel fortunate that I think I understand a lot about what the needs are of community and what the needs are of a neighborhood, such as the neighborhood that we think we're working toward building here in Bijou Square. Entertainment's a very big part of Bijou Square, and I think that there's a place here for everyone, and if anyone can describe another place they need, I think we can build it and make it available. And I think that the types of things that have gone on all day here are invaluable for all of us to carry forward with conversation about the things that we think are going well and need to be enhanced, and the things that we think need a lot more conversation, a lot more work to try to pull together. We're in a tough state to do things artistically because as wealthy as most people think Connecticut is, obviously it's dramatically cut back its funding for the arts through the years, as all of you are well aware. And we're also kind of up against it in the sense that we have 169 municipalities here, none of which are part of a county other than geographically. So we're all kind of out there on our own trying to make things work. I think we can do it. I know we can do it. And I think that if everyone tries to focus a bit on the easiest things to do first and show some success, I think we'll also be able to do the very difficult things as well. We appreciate that this opportunity came up for you to visit Bijou Square today. If you have not been here before, hopefully you'll be here again. And I think that, again, as many of us as can have to continue this conversation, and we have to spread it as wide as we can to make it successful. Thanks.
To start off the panel discussion, Richard, can I have you take the football and start it? You and I were having a conversation yesterday, and would you start with talking about the macro sense and the need for the shared service model? You know, we benefit here in downtown Bridgeport. I know that you heard from Marcelo Kovac talking about the Beehive co-working space, which is right across the street, also housed in one of Phil's buildings here at Bijou Square. And certainly that helps build a network of for-profit entrepreneurs. But is there a similar model? Is there a place in the market for nonprofits to share space and service?
I think there is, and it's really something we want to engage the audience in a conversation with about today. As I mentioned, and I also should add, I was born in Bridgeport. My parents immigrated here from Germany, and this city is very important to us philanthropically, and what we've been able to see today and the work Phil's done is really, it's heartening. But we have a lot more we can do. When we, as a grant maker in the arts, and we're a relatively small one, but it turns out most of the grant makers in the arts are pretty small. When we've looked around at the nonprofits coming to us, we saw a lot of organizations in sub $500,000 budget range, almost all sub-million, and all doing the same things, all asking the same funders for grants, and of course each replicating the same back office practices that each has to maintain as being a nonprofit corporation. So I know that when we looked at the variety of programs and organizations, we were really pleased with the services. In this case, youth education is our focus on education of children and youth. But we saw a lot of gaps. A lot of children are not getting services they need. And we can talk about public or private funding. In the end, it's got to be a balance of both and all of us working together. But what we realized that we ought to spend some time exploring is there an opportunity to take advantage of some synergies across organizations, like or unlike, particularly on the things that don't have anything to do with the services they're providing. So all the financial management services and the kind of back office support and the idea of space. So these are things that are more neutral across organizations. And so we've been really interested in exploring whether, to what extent, we might be able to have some synergies in shared services to build stronger nonprofits, take a student-centered lens of this, which is that children need continuous support from early childhood all the way through graduation from high school, then into college. How can we make sure that the nonprofit sector and public sector is providing the services our kids need? That takes us away from the adult agendas in the organizations and brought us to thinking, well, the programs are strong, but we have capacity weaknesses in the organizations. How can we work together, take advantage of synergy? And so we believe there are some paths to that. There are analogies in other sectors of this work, and so we're very interested in exploring this here in Fairfield County.
Yeah, I forgot to mention, Rich and I were talking about this yesterday. You are all involved with this discussion. We want feedback and talking about the feasibility of such a structure. Jim, I want to follow up on our conversation from earlier. What types of services lend itself to this type of sharing? Which that the nonprofit? What?
Well, I'll start from the beginning of the critical mass necessary to get any organization off the ground is very hard to do in a vacuum, and particularly if you are, as has been pointed out earlier in the presentation, particularly if you're dealing in budgets that get eaten up very quickly if you have to spend a lot of it on the stuff nobody likes to talk about, how you make the sausage, who does the wiring for the building, how do you do this, how do you do that? And to Dawn's point, this all becomes really a question of critical mass. And to the degree that those services that are common to everybody don't cross proprietary bounds or get involved with conflicts of interest of any kind, at least all of the members at Camaraderie have found it to be most appropriate that they're sharing an office space where everybody shares the cost of the electricity. It's in their rent. There's no additional charges for that. All of the infrastructure for the latest in electronics and in the internet is already provided. So we're able to spread that cost over a larger domain. And we have 14 member companies who don't have to be burdened with trying to figure out how that sausage gets made in the first place. And I think to Dawn's point earlier, the group of creative professionals that we have in our facility, including artists, what they don't know is really significant. What I do know is that when tax time comes, they end up with a shoebox full of stuff and they give it to their accountant and say, please see if you can make some sense out of this. So I like the idea of the creating a critical mass. There's areas like accounting that, certainly you have almost a relationship with your accountant like you do with a priest or like you do with with your tax man. The fact of the matter is there's no need to have to share all of those ideas with one or another as long as you can get the job done. And I think there's a lot of commonality there.
Great, thanks. Dawn, what do you think, from your experience in Danbury and in Portland, Maine, how would we break down the walls of silos to get people to consider this type of model so they're willing to share information, willing to save services? Do you see that there's a tension there that we'd have to overcome?
Interestingly enough, I think that a lot of the tension is generational. So old business, and I'm part of that generation, everything is proprietary. It's a zero-sum game. For me to win, someone else is going to lose. And I think you find, especially in shared spaces, co-working spaces, that people are participating in a community, sharing best practices and information, and they realize that if we all do better, we all win. So it's a very different way of thinking about it. And in the services that we provide and others provide, legal ideas, so information on intellectual property, having somebody give counsel to nonprofits on what are the best practices, what to do and what not to do. Accounting, back office, and bookkeeping advice, how to keep proper books and records, what to expect of boards, things like that. That's information that can be shared, but I do find that it's generational. A lot of young people feel a great deal of openness to best practices, best ideas, that it's all going to come back to every person in their own way. And a lot of those people are very open to remote working, co-working spaces, open areas, a different sense of what space and community is. So I think as the younger generation teaches us their own best practices, we're all going to do better and learn.
Great. Phil, being the host of a co-working space in the Beehive, what would you suggest would be that if there is a groundswell of support for this type of structure, what would you think of the first few steps to help building consensus, but also to forming the organization?
Well, I think there are a lot of different answers to that, and I think that some of the points have already been made, but I think that it's somewhat typical that not-for-profit organizations that are, especially the ones that are small to medium-sized, cannot hire all the talent that they need. They spread a lot of the requirements of what needs to be done over a very small group of people or a single individual that's in their office that has some very strong talents in some areas, but other areas they are weaker. I mean, it's normal. We're all human. None of us can do all the things that we like to be capable of doing. But in my opinion, with the resources being as short as they are from, especially from government, I think that people have to start to recognize that there is far more to lose by trying to stay independent and by trying to be territorial or protective of their resources. They have to be careful with the resources, but not necessarily as protective of where those resources come from, and especially when it comes to things that we haven't even touched upon, such as marketing and the parts of the business that are expensive, sometimes far too expensive for small organizations to handle, but if shared with others, it could work. If you're trying to sell an automobile, you don't usually approach someone who rides a horse and has no car. You approach someone that already has an automobile. So if you run a symphony and you're selling tickets to a symphony, and there's also an opera group in the area or any other organization that you think may have some of that same audience in mind, the ability to be able to go to all of that audience and to share things that most organizations today are very reluctant, if not absolutely refusing to, share things like mailing lists. You know, contributions that are made someone could argue might be lost by one organization in favor of another, but that's probably a very, very, very small part of what could happen compared to the benefits that could be generated by it. Throughout business today, there are all types of space sharing and service sharing things that go on. Small individuals, businesses buy insurance in groups. They join organizations like a Chamber of Commerce or like a business organization so that they can purchase health insurance and things at a lower rate. Big corporations are doing things like hoteling space, where there might be 2 or 3 different people that share a workstation, either a number of days a week or a number of hours of the day, and fewer and fewer people are having their space that's dedicated to them for the 7 or 8 or 9 hours that they're there a day, and then it goes vacant the rest of the time that they're not. So the concept of shared spaces and the concept that if you do have a few venues and or organizations in an area, say in the theater business, if someone is rehearsing a play on a stage that requires them to leave sets and things set up, they get no revenue those days that they're rehearsing. If they can have a less expensive shared rehearsal space, shared storage space, things that are somewhat overlooked because people don't think that those are expenses, but they are expenses, are all things that can be considered. And I think that if the state of Connecticut is going to continue to feel that it only has very limited funds for the arts, I think that the state of Connecticut is going to have to start to require that the dollars are distributed to areas where there are some type of umbrella type organizations or organizations that can provide some of those kind of services and provide some of that kind of assistance so that cost is saved and so that, frankly, all of the organizations benefit by it. I don't want to go on too long about this, but I think that kind of capsulizes it.
Sure. This is a general question to all the panelists. Richard, do you mind just taking the ball to start the conversation? The actual structure, you had proposed in our conversations an idea of how this comes together. Is it a cooperative? Is it a membership, fee-based structure? Just curious if I can get some input from each one of you about what the actual structures are. Their board of directors, are officers that run this? Who's responsible for manning the downtime that Phil references?
Indeed. I think there are efficiency and there are effectiveness matters in thinking about this work. And one of the things we had some pre-conversations about this was what kind of synergies do you need in the organizations? How like should they be? And for example, in education, there's a tradition of something called educational service agencies. Every state has them. We have RISCs, they're called here. New York has BOCES. In Massachusetts, there are co-ops, and I participated in building a co-op for a set of schools in Washington, D.C. through the Annie Casey Foundation some years ago as an example modeled on this. But the idea that we could have an entity that's getting into marketing, financial back office services, technology, data analysis, what kind of entity might do those things in a way that would be trusted by the incumbent organizations, and what kind of process would be necessary to develop that idea. So the idea that we had talked about in our conversation was one of a cooperative, something that would be, and of course Jim's got a membership arrangement, but something that you belong to, that what you get out depends on how much skin in the game you want to put in, but doesn't disrupt the kinds of services you're providing. On the effectiveness side, the idea is to reach more children and families with services to close those gaps. On the efficiency side, it's to do that by saving money on back office so you can invest more. So a co-op model could be one such model. Again, the entities themselves, we talk sometimes about mergers. Those kinds of conversations are possible, I think. But initially, an exploration of the kinds of synergy that's available, where we can work together to share And a co-op model could be such a model where folks are belonging to it in some way. The member organizations potentially are comprised of the board of directors. For example, in Massachusetts, that's how their educational services agencies work. The superintendents are all on the board, and then they decide what the entity is going to do. I think there are a number of options. I certainly don't have all the answers. I think some of that has to come out from the organizations that are interested in the topic. But yeah, the co-op model is one that struck us as potentially viable.
Jim, your thoughts on organizational structure of such a shared space?
Well,
shared
I
service
mean,
organization?
in our location, it's really the member model, and the members really decide what things they want to collaborate on and what things they do not want to collaborate on. One that we're exploring right now, for example, is most of these firms and individuals have their own individual VoIP system. And might there be some real synergies if we combine a unilateral VoIP system? And the more I looked into this, the more it became evident to me that that's not necessarily precluded by walls. So many of your organizations could negotiate a collective contract for the VoIP or the phone services or the data services that you use. And in the old days, it used to have to happen inside of four walls. Now it has to happen inside of whatever your mind can develop. I think there's real opportunity for cost savings for everybody without compromising or sacrificing your own individuality. From our point of view, we really try to address the needs of the member network, and we're very involved in asking them on a continuum, what is there out there that we can do better, and how can we help facilitate it? So I don't know about the aggregate organizational structure, but I think there's plenty of opportunity for benefit.
Well, as a service provider in the area of bookkeeping, financial reporting, I know that for several nonprofit organizations within one of the co-working spaces we're involved in Maine, that they are each too small alone to be able to hire bookkeeping, admin, HR, things like that. But in conjunction with one another, they are able to, so that three of them can afford to hire a company such as ours or individuals to handle certain functions that they all need. So obviously there is an agreement that every company's information is proprietary and not available to the other, but that is something that both small startups and nonprofits can do. If you can't use 100% of one person's services, find two or three others who can. It's a great cost savings. You're able to, when you're able to afford that in a group, you're going to get a higher level of experience and expertise, and that's what you need going forward in order to grow. So I think definitely it never hurts to ask, you know. You done?
Phil, question for you. And Jim mentioned the four walls. Does such a structure naturally have to reside within Bridgeport? I mean, could we focus on a regional model? Do you think organizations throughout the region can cooperate together in such a model?
Oh, absolutely. I don't see any reason why there has to be any limits that are self-imposed or imposed upon the organization by anyone. I think that if you're talking about things that are shared government funds, sometimes the government funds might only go to companies that are located within that jurisdiction, be it a municipality or be it a state. But obviously, these days the world is connected, obviously, and people as old as me didn't grow up that way, but we've had to learn very quickly that that's not only the most prevalent thought that going forward that has to be considered is how widespread connectivity is and will continue to grow to be, and how much more clear it can be. Sure, there are always the concerns about how other people might be able to get a hold of that information, but for the kind of organizations we're talking about, I would think that it's going to still be more regional rather than statewide or a section of the country necessarily. But I do think that there is no real limit to it. There isn't any reason to think there is, but you start someplace.
We have roughly 15 minutes left, and I'd like to throw this out to the audience. A show of hands first before we take some questions. How many folks, at first blush, this idea tickles their fancy, and they'd like to consider the feasibility of working together, merging with other organizations, cooperating. Show of hands. Okay, I think that's a healthy number, certainly a healthy number. Any questions that you'd like to have for the panelists about their insights? David to the back.
I'm with, now I'm on, okay. Hi, my name is Marty Etter. I'm with the Ballet School of Stanford in Stanford. We have moved 5 times in 19 years. One of the places that I was saddest about us losing was a cooperative shared space that we tried to do with Stanford Center for the Arts, where we went in and renovated their space in exchange for a sharing process where we'd provide a receptionist, they'd provide the phone system. And we had Stanford Theatre Works and Connecticut Grand Opera, Namagascar, we were all in the space, and the idea 10 years ago was what you're talking about, where we would be able to start sharing marketing. We would, have one copier, we would have one kitchen, all of those wonderful things. And unfortunately, because of some financial problems with SEA, it didn't last. It lasted 2 years. But those 2 years were really exciting, and I think that really was something that could have made a big difference, because I look now, and Stanford Theatre Works is no more. Connecticut Grand Opera is no more. And the funding for the arts are going down and down, and we all had different ways to use the space, ours being an after-school program, them being professional theaters, and I think it's the answer. I think it's what we need to be trying to do, because first off, it was exciting for our kids to get to walk in and hear an opera singer auditioning, and sharing spaces, and really just coming up with something that made a huge difference for our community. And so I'm on board. I think a lot of us are having conversations, trying to find ways to make this happen. So thank you very much for talking about all this, because I think it's what we've got to do. I think we have to get over this fear of collaborating and realizing that that's the only way we're going to exist. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you. Very well put. I think I have, my name's Maria Rivera. I'm a visual artist. So I don't know that I really have an organization, but I find myself avoiding coming to certain places because of the parking not being available, or, oh, gee, I didn't have enough change in my pocket. And I'm just sort of wondering if we can even start to think about all those little supportive things, just to get people into Bridgeport, for example. Downtown Stanford, if we sold, let's say, parking passes for a month, we could put them in our windshield. This is something that's just coming to mind, so that I don't have to worry about having to change to feed the meter, and the town or the city still gets its revenue and all that sort of thing. But we do need, as one of the former panelists was saying earlier, we do need to focus on community. And I think because we're Americans and we're so schooled on being independent, it's coming around that we're saying, well, the independence gets us only so far, and we do have to collaborate. And that, I just wanted to make that observation. And I'm really happy to learn that the work is in progress. It gives me hope. Thank you.
How do I do that? Are we back? Yeah. So I'll comment to the question about the parking. We, in our site selection, we searched for 1.5 years to find a place that had free parking. And this is an obvious problem that is prohibitive in a lot of different areas. And even though you don't have free parking, I love the idea of some kind of community parking pass for facilities like this that are in a totally urban area that cannot address that parking issue. When I drove in here today, it was very hard to find a place to park. I think that's a very key element, and I think the word and the term that is coming up more and more and more and should continue to really rise to the surface is that we need to think of each other as a community, and we in the past have really operated somewhat in silos.
I would just like to make one brief comment also, and this, believe me, this is not a criticism of the concern that some people have about parking, but first of all, I suggest you all read books or excerpts, or the book or excerpts from the book, The Cost of Free Parking, because there is no such thing as free parking. And if any of us look at anything that's published today about where the growth is in our country, it's back in the urban areas and it's in the more densely populated areas where people want to be, and people should expect that when they go to these areas that sometimes they may walk 3 or 4 or 5 blocks and they'll find that it's actually not so bad. And for businesses to prosper and for communities to prosper, this theater could have all of 3 cars parked in front of it, but it's got 220 seats. So if people think they're going to drive up to the front door of a building, whether it be a retail place or a restaurant or entertainment space or the place they work, they've got to realize that they're going to have to park someplace. Now, there is a lot of responsibility that needs to go to municipalities to do things like Bridgeport is doing now, which they have finally, after years, placed their first order for smart meters, which are parking meters that accept credit cards as well as coins, as well as being able to call with an app on your phone and have money put into the meter. And those things are very progressive. But frankly, if this room were filled with people, and I'm 66 years old, so I'm not calling anybody else in the room old at 50, but if this room were full of people under 50, there'd be no conversation about parking. They don't expect the same kind of things that we have gotten used to over the years. We've gotten used to thinking about where we're going, and it's interesting that if people go to a mall, they'll pull in, and the minute they're on the property of the mall, they think they're there. And whether they walk the equivalent of 2 or 3 or 4 blocks from where they park their car to actually go to the store that they're going to doesn't cross their mind, because once they're on the property, they're at the mall. So people have to think about that they're going to the downtown, or that they're going to the center city, or that they're going to whatever the place they're going to is. And it's well documented that cities, the larger cities, such as New York City, Chicago, even down to much smaller cities, are healthier cities because people do walk more, and people actually have all those better experiences than what we imagine we're going to have.
Thank you for that. The parking issue is important. My name is Diane Lauricella, and I'm part of a group that's trying to revive the Lucille Lortel White Barn Theater in Norwalk and Westport, and we're at the end of the run. And one thing that's been interesting is in the live performing arts world, we found that some folks, we feel that sharing spaces and services will be the only thing that will save this space. The intent is to have performing studio space. We found that Paul Newman used to actually rehearse at the White Barn Lucille Lortel Theater before he would go to the Westport Playhouse or other playhouses, because it was a smaller, intimate space. So I'm here to advertise that we are desperately in need of partnering more with other performing arts theaters in the region. We have to keep each other alive by supporting each other and not be worried if every theater has to market its uniqueness. And in this case, we plan to promote unique, creative, and new works, not reviving musicals, which are very important as well. We don't want to take up other people's mission. We have a unique mission that Miss Lortel started as a feisty broad back in the 40s. So from that, I wanted to say, what would you say to the performing arts theaters who are mostly all struggling when they're not larger theaters you see at Broadway, but the ones that are regional in nature and local? What would be some ways that those theaters could share space, make sure they rent out at low cost studio space, performance space, learning how to write plays? I've met a wonderful woman from the Playmakers group. We're going to try to work with each other. But what are some thoughts about, from your other experiences in other parts of the country even, or New York, how can we make sure we keep performing arts alive?
Those are all very, very great points that you've made, and you're correct that your organization, like so many others, is in great jeopardy if they aren't able to form some of the collaborative kind of movements that are happening. it's very interesting that my personal favorite, my wife and my own personal favorite thing to do in New York is not to go to the large Broadway productions that are extravaganzas and are wonderful performances, but we'd rather go to the off and off Broadway performances where the only thing that's on a stage, if they're trying to say it's a bedroom, is a bed, and then that gets rolled off when they're back in the kitchen and there's a table with 2 chairs out there. That's the kitchen. And the costumes aren't an extravagance, but what's great is the talent that is performing in front of you. And I think that these days people have so many options for entertainment, be it most of it being electronic or things in their home or in their hand or in their car. And I think that what we need to do is regenerate that thought that everything does not need to be an extravaganza. A great example is the Downtown Cabaret Theater, which is in one of our other buildings here downtown, has been in that building for 38 years. And for the first 28 of those years, their practice was to put on extravaganzas, and they would have 4 weekends or 5 weekends in a row, Thursday through Sunday, where there was a performance and nothing else going on, and then for 8 weeks they'd be rehearsing another play and nothing going on until that play was on the stage again. And although they are a not-for-profit that was as successful as they could expect to be in having funds generated by donation, they couldn't continue to operate that way. There has to be a way to have things on a stage more often. And if you're sharing it with other organizations, that's the best way to do it. If there can be rehearsal spaces, the reason we developed a small black box theater here downtown is not only to be used for less expensive needs that people have to do anything from we've had a range of things from small dance classes and things to, frankly, St. Joseph's High School sends their cheerleaders here to practice their cheerleading for 3 months of the year. And, they only needed a few hours a day. So similar to things like using Uber or Lyft, where you rent a car for the time you need it, being able to only spend the money that a space costs for the time that you need it obviously becomes less expensive, but it also allows there to be more access to those spaces and those venues. And I know that that's too focused on event space, and I don't want that to be what the conversation is about today, but I think it's a very good example, and I think it answers your direct question. But there needs to be the back office space as well. When Richard and Jim and I met, and unfortunately, when we met, Dawn wasn't able to make it, but when we got together and talked about this, the first part of the conversation was, well, does it have to be very just music-related businesses or just acting performers type organizations? And frankly, I think we concluded that it does not have to be. It should be. By design, it should be much more inclusive and much more widespread, because that will help to relieve some of that anxiety or angst about people thinking, well, gee, we're all so similar. If information gets shared, it's going to put one of us or more of us in a bad position. So all of these things need to be considered. And frankly, if we can't make it work in the more densely populated areas, we're certainly not going to be able to make it work also in the suburban, more remote areas, because those areas are obviously going to have a greater difficulty in attracting the multiple users, and they still have to do things like the free parking, which isn't free.
Why don't we, I joke about this with my wife and my daughter quite a bit, and my son actually. When I'm doing something wrong, I get the eyes, right? So I get the hairy eyeball. I just got that from David. So we're going to have, regarding time, so we're going to have one more question, and then we're going to short end, and we're going to give a summary of the 3 main things we learned today here.
Okay, Bob Jacobs here, board member of Neighborhood Studios. We're at 391 East Washington Avenue. We have a building that's about 10,000 square feet. We provide after-school programs for kids starting at 4:30 in the afternoon, but during the day, we're looking for a shared tenant, a way to rationalize our rent. So I'm throwing it out to the panel and to the audience. Our website is nstudios.org. We're seriously looking, we're in the process of trying to find somebody or a group of organizations that could help us offload some of the rent.
if I can respond, and maybe I'll
Richard,
just
go
say
ahead.
my last, if we're down to last remarks. Is
I
that
think
where we
we're
are?
down to last remarks,
Happy
yeah.
to chat with you at Neighborhood Studios. You're definitely one of the organizations that's on our radar. You know, I think there's an issue, the funders, the developers, the businesses, we all have roles to play. I know as a grant maker, I've not received a single proposal that's proposed anything collaborative. It's always been each individual organization, and that may be because we haven't set out the right funding criteria, and maybe that's where it takes the funding community to do some shaping and prioritize. But I know that for us at B Foundation, Spread Music Now, which are the roles I'm talking to you today in, we're very interested in those of you that are funders, that are interested in co-investing with us in a process to explore and build a business plan for a shared space and shared service entity. And for the organizations out there, you all, leadership has to come from you. And we need to understand your willingness and interest in collaboration in this way. But we also think we've got to set up a bit of a process to make that happen. And so if you're interested either on the funding side or on the participation side, do see me. Happy to have that conversation with you.
So I want to thank all the panelists for participating today. My father, who's in the audience, always taught me that when you're writing or speaking, you follow the keyhole model, right? So you tell them what you're going to tell them, you tell them, and then you tell them what you told them. So we're at the part of where we tell you, right, what we told you. And I think per what David said, there are three major points that I came across, and any of the panelists can correct me, but the three things I learned here, that there is the macro setting, because of the struggles of funding and necessity, there is demand for such a structure, of shared services. Two, that there are common areas of synergy, be it marketing, ticketing management, or accounting. You know, there certainly is, there's certainly options to partner in, and there's certainly need. And then, and that what we were talking about before, the nice woman in the back was saying, these conversations are in motion, and there certainly seems to be a groundswell percolating for this type of model. So we had an offer, Richard offered to talk to folks about putting the X's and O's together for a business plan for such a structure. I'm sure David would be willing to be part of that, and we can help facilitate that through the Cultural Alliance. I'm excited from what I hear. So I want to thank all the panelists again. I want to, if we give them a nice round of applause. And I want to thank everyone for your questions. And I think there's a lot of work to do, but I think this is a great start. Thank you.